Alright, so I've got my geometry set up here with the double-sided shader. So what I want to do now is I want to use this as instance geometry in a particle simulation. So I'm going to have particles hitting a wall. I'll create new particles, and then those new particles will use instances of this geometry to create the bullet holes. Alright, so let me import a file here. Alright, so you see I've got a little scene already set up here. I've got a very nice M4 machine gun model that was supplied to me by a colleague, Oliver Balzer. So thank you very much, Oliver. I think it's a really nice model. And if we run the simulation, let me just see that. We can see that I've got a simulation already set up here. So the machine gun is shooting particles, but you can see not much else is happening. The particles are passing right through this wall. Nothing's really happening beyond that. So there are a couple of things I want to have happen here. I want to set up some more refined control in the gun itself. Now, if we select the M4 gun, you can see I've already got the animation set up on its translation and rotation. And I've got some custom controls set up here. I'm not going to get into too much detail on these, but we will look at the expressions that all these are driving. But yeah, so what I want to have happen is I want to have this particle object, particle bullet, I want it to collide with my wall geometry, and when it collides with that wall geometry, I'm going to use a particle collision event to create a new particle, and it's that new particle that's going to use particle instancing to give me my bullet holes. So I think the first thing I need to do is, let's see, let's set up the control for our machine gun. Alright, so there's my machine gun, and if we come down here, alright, so here's some of the expressions that I'm going to be using. So I'm going to set up this expression right now, and it's pretty straightforward. Now, as you can see, like I said, I've got some custom attributes here: fire, rate mult, and velocity mult. And basically, these are all just set up to make it easy for the animator to work with this machine gun. The last thing you want is to build a system that requires the animator to go into your emitter to directly animate the rate. It's much easier for your animators if you've got a just nice simple control like fire, and maybe some easy controls like the rate multiplier and the velocity multiplier right there for them to work with. So what I've got here is I declare a variable base rate, and it's just some random number between 8 and 12, because I find with machine guns, if you've got a little bit of randomness in your emission rate, it just makes it look a lot nicer, it makes it look a lot more natural. And I've also got this rate multiplier because I want to be able to increase or decrease the rate, but still have some randomness in there. So I can adjust that value, and then this getAttr command gets whatever value I've got in there, puts it into this variable. And then I've got this fire attribute, and there you see that I've got fire. Fire is basically my trigger. That value will always be either 1 or 0. And so my emitter bullet, its rate is just the rate multiplier, here's my rate multiplier, whatever value I put in there, times the base rate, and my base rate is going to be some random number between 8 and 12, times fire. So the nice thing about this is it gives me randomness from this base rate, gives me the ability to adjust the volume to whatever I want, and by having this times either 1 or 0, I can either have the value whatever my rate needs to be, or 0. It's a really nice simple setup here. And then my speed, the emission speed, is just whatever my velocity multiplier is, and you can see right now it's fairly high. Alright, so let me just grab that and find my emitter. There's my emitter. Where is my emitter? Alright, so say speed, create new expression. So there we are, there's my expression editor. Or I could have just opened the expression editor. Pop that in there, click create. So now, if we play, now we can see that we've got a much more discrete firing of the gun now. Now we don't have just this constant stream of bullets. Now this is more kind of in semi-automatic mode, which in this particular instance I think works a little better. Alright, so that's good. Alright, so next thing I want to do is I want to set up my wall as a collision object. So I'm just going to select this. It's a poly mesh. Unfortunately you can't do this with NURB surfaces. You can in traditional dynamics, but not end dynamics. Alright, so I select my wall, go to end mesh, create passive collider. Oops, create passive collider. Alright, so now when I play, let's pick our bullets. Alright, actually, let's take a look at this from a different angle, see it a little better. Alright. So now when we play, alright. So now we can see the bullets hit, and well, they just kind of slide along. Okay, so that's good. My particles are hitting. That's good. Now, before I go too far, though, I want to take a look at something because this is important. So I'm just going to come into the side view here and turn off the grid because it's a little hard to see. All right. So here's one of my particles. There's my bullet particle that's collided with the surface. But you notice how it's not right on the surface. Now in this case, because of the way my instance geometry is going to work, I need to be very accurate with my collisions. I need to make sure that my particles are right on the surface. Now the reason that my particle is not right on the surface is, well, it's a couple of things. First off, I got my particle selected here. If I go into particle size for my bullet, you can see that right now the radius is 0.2. Let's set that to 0 and see if that's enough. Stupid taskbar. Alright, so we can see that my particles, they're a little closer to the surface, but they're still off of the surface. Alright, so I'm going to select my, my wall now. And because I've set it as a collision object, it now has a rigid shape node associated with it. And if I go to the collision tab for that, we can see that it does have thickness to it, and we can actually take a look at that. And we can see, yeah, the collision there, thickness is pretty thick. So I'm going to bring my collision thickness down to 0. Rewind that, and now let's see. The particle's a little hard to see. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to change my particle type for the moment. Shading. I'm going to make them spheres, just to make it a little easier to see what's happening. Oh, the radius is 0, so it's a little hard to see them. Let me bring that up a little bit right now. Okay, so there we are. Alright, so we can see them. They're very close. And if I set that radius back down to 0, alright, I think that's good. Yeah, the reason we're not seeing them is because they're right on the surface. Alright, so I think that's pretty good. We can't really see them, but that's okay. The bullet particle I don't really need to see. Alright, so what I want to do now is I want to set up a particle collision, I want to set up a particle collision event. So this particle is colliding with the surface. Well, now I want something to happen when that happens. So select my N particle bullet, come up to N particles, and select Particle Collision Event Editor. This is a very cool tool. Alright, so what this does is this basically just gives me a nice interface for setting up stuff that happens when particles collide with other stuff. Now, most of this stuff you can do manually if you're comfortable with Mel scripting or Python scripting, but the Particle Collision Event Editor is a nice, easy way of dealing with it if you're not a big developer. Alright, so the object, yes, my N particle bullet. On which collision do I want this to happen? In this case, I'm going to turn off the default all collisions. I only want this to happen on the first collision, which is actually collision 0. The event type I want to emit, so when my particle collides with the wall, I want it to emit into a new particle object. The number of particles, 1. For every particle that hits the wall, I want a new particle to be born. The target particle, I want to create a new particle for me, so I'm just going to enter the name N particle crater. Make sure my spelling is right. N particle crater. Yep. Inherit velocity. I'm going to set that to 0. I want these particles to stop, and I'm going to turn on original particle dies. I could include an event procedure if I wanted things to get a little fancier, but right now I don't really need to. So now I click on Create Event. Now you notice as soon as I click on Create Event, Maya's going to create a new particle object. There we go, N particle crater, just like I asked it to. Great. Alright, so let's close that. Now when I play the simulation, there we see. Nice. So there's my particles. So wherever the bullet particle hits the wall, these guys get born, which is nice. Okay, now for N particle crater, all I really want it to do is just sit there. So I'm going to make a couple of little changes from the default. Its radius, I'm going to set that to 0. And I'm going to turn collisions off. I don't actually need these guys to collide with anything. The bullet particle has already done the collision. These guys are just going to be born and sit there. And one last little thing under dynamic properties. Actually, let me play this a little bit. Oh, we can't see them because we can't see them because I made the radius so small. Let me bring the radius back up a little bit. Alright, so now when I play, you see how they're born and they start to fall because they're being affected by gravity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, under the dynamic properties section, I'm going to turn on ignore solver gravity. That way they're not affected by the default nucleus gravity. Alright, perfect. So now we see them born and they sit there. So this is really cool. So now we can see, as my machine gun goes along, we can see the path of destruction that it leaves behind. Actually, let's take a look at that from the shot camera. Rewind. There we go. So we can see that's where all our bullet impact points are going to be. So that's not looking too bad. Alright, so cool. So I've got my particle collision event happening there. So let's see, what do I want to have happen now? Alright, cool. So I want to set up my particle instancing now. I've got my N particle crater appearing. Actually, now's a good time to set its radius back down to 0. There we go. So yeah, so I want to set up my particle instancing now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my my crater geometry. Now you notice the naming of my craters. Crater 00, crater 01, 02. I've named them this way because, as you probably know, computers start counting from 0. So I'm going to select U, U, and U. And now I'm going to go to N particles, instancer, open the option window. And there we are. Okay, cool. So now we can see listed here are the items that I want to be instanced to my particle. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking that they need to select the particle that they want involved in the particle instancing system, and then they end up with millions of particles and they can't figure out why. No, what you want to do is the geometry that you want to repeat, you select that. That shows up in your instance options section, and then Here in the particle object instance, you select the particle object that you want your instance geometry to be applied to. So in this case, it's nParticle creator shape. And there's some other options I could set here, but for now I'm just going to leave it almost at the default settings and click on Create. So now it creates the creator instancer node, and if I play now, now we can see that we've got instance copies of the geometry right there. And if we pick these guys, actually right now it's only creator 1 that is being used. We'll rectify that in a second. But if I scale these guys up a little bit, so now we can see my instance geometry applied there. Now just with this, I could stop here. This could be the end of the system. But we can actually add some very cool stuff relatively easily, just with a couple of expressions. Alright, let's stop that. Okay, so let me select my particle creator node. Open the attribute editor. Now, when you're dealing with particle instancing, you're going to go back and forth a little bit between the particle itself and, let me close this up, close up collisions. You're going to go back and forth between the, it's going to take me just a second to find it. Oh, I'm going to change this to, not that it really matters, but I'm going to change the particle type for particle creator to points, but set the radius to 0, so it doesn't really matter anyways. Just kind of have it. If we go, yeah, here it is, the instancer section. So when you're dealing with particle instancing in Maya, you're going to go back and forth between the instancer node itself and the particle object and the instancer section within the particle object. Okay, so right now, as we saw, Maya is only using the first particle object. So, or sorry, the first creator. And I want it to use all three, obviously. So I'm going to actually go back to my instancer node, and under cycle, I'm going to change it from none to sequential. Now if we play now, we'll see what happens. Oh, silly me. They're flashing like that because I scaled creator 0 up to 4, but creator 1 and creator 2 are still at 1. So let me scale these guys up to 4 as well. I'm going to set their scale back to 1 in a second. Oh, and also you can see creator 1. It's I haven't turned off its face normal, so let me turn that off. Oh, creator 0. Oh, hang on. No, that's not right. Oh, I'm in the wrong thing. Oh, actually, that doesn't matter. Polygons, face normals. Turn that off. Display. Polygon, face normals. Yeah. There we go. Face normals off. Alright. Not that it really matters, it's just kind of goofy looking. Alright, so now with our three pieces of geometry showing up, we can see what's happening. So what's happening right now is Maya is cycling through my three pieces of geometry. Now in some instances this is great. Say I wanted to instance you know, a flock of birds with their wings flapping. I would have multiple pieces of geometry that represent the poses of the birds. But that's not what I want to have happen. In this case, I want one of these pieces of geometry to be instanced to my particle, and I want it to stick on that. And then when we get to the next particle, I want to have a different piece of geometry, then a different piece of geometry. So I'm not quite getting that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my instancer node, and we can see that we're set to sequential. That's why we're running through the sequence. But what's happening right now, my cycle step is set to 1. So that means every frame it advances to the next guy. I'm going to turn this up. Right now you can see my animation goes from 1 to 150, so I'm going to set my cycle step. I'm going to double that. I'm going to set it to 300. So that means it's going to be 300 frames before Maya goes to the next target. So if I play that now, we're back to Maya sticking with one target, but it's always the same one. Alright, so we're almost there. So if I go back to my particle creator, remember I said you're going to go back and forth. Alright, so here I am on my particle object in the instancer node section. If I go down to cycle options, we see we've got cycle start object. What this is this allows me to tell Maya where in this list should we start. Right now it's just starting at the beginning. I'm going to change that. I'm just going to change it to particle ID. So now when we go through, we can see that are they all the same? Let's see. Particle start object, particle ID. Oh, they all still look the same. It shouldn't be. Particle start object. That should totally work. Let me just double check, make sure that sequential is set. Frames, 300. These are the guys. That should be working. Is that not working? Okay, I can tell you why it's not working. One of the things you're going to find when you're dealing with the particle instancing in Maya, when you're dealing with these little widgets in the instancer section, and this is kind of goofy, but often, not sometimes, often, when you select something like I did, particle ID, it looks like Maya's made the change, but in fact it hasn't. Notice how I selected the this other node creator instancer, and when I came back, cycle start object was back to none. I had to come back and do it a second time. Now that I've selected particle ID, we can see that yes, Maya is using different guys. So let's say I pick particle 1 here, just so we can see. If I set his scale back down to 1, so we can see, yeah, put it back to 4. Let's do the same thing with this guy. Set his scale to 1. See those guys. Back up to 4. And creator 2, same thing. So yeah, so now we can see all 3 guys are being used. Alright, in fact, I'm going to set all their scales back to 1 now, because I'm going to start getting into more specific controls. But so far, it's looking pretty good. So there we go. Alright, so now one of the things that's really great about the particle instancer node in Maya, or the particle instancing system I should say, is your ability to sort of set things up the way you want. So right now what I would like is I'd like to be able to control the scale and the rotation of my instance pieces of geometry. Because right now, with just these 3 pieces of geometry, if I see a lot of these bullet holes, I'm gonna start to see a pattern show up, especially because I'm using particle ID as the cycle start object. You know, I'm gonna start to see the pattern show up. But I don't want to do that. If I can adjust the scale, if I can randomize the scale and the rotation of these instance pieces of geometry, then you'll never see any kind of pattern show up. Alright, so let's see. Alright, so for the expression, this is the expression I'm going to use. Alright, so I'm going to set a seed. That's just going to give me repeatability when I run random functions. Alright, so first thing is I've got a creator high and creator low variable, and what they do is they just get the value, use getAttr, so getAttr m4.creator high and creator low, and if we come back to my gun, you can see that I have these custom attributes in here, crater high, crater low, and what that's going to do is that's going to give me an upper and a lower range for the random scale values of my my bullets, which is cool. All right, and what's next? Okay, and then float IS and float IR. Okay, so yeah, so for my IS is short for impact scale, and IR is impact rotation. So float IS is going to be random number between the low value and the high value that have been input over here. And my impact rotation is just a random number between 0 and 360. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. Now, right now, you see that end particle crater shape dot impact rotate and impact scale, that's where I'm going to put these variables, but these attributes, they don't exist yet in my particle object. I've got to add them to the particle object. But that's easy. So let's go back to our particle object, attribute editor, and alright, so I'm going to go to the add dynamic attributes section. Actually, let's open up per particle array attributes section. So these are the per particle attributes that are associated with my end particle crater, and you see there's a few, kind of default predictable ones like position, ramp position, velocity, mass, lifespan, but there's no way that the developers at Autodesk can know every attribute that we're going to want to put in there, so we can easily add our own attributes. So I'm just going to click on Add Dynamic Attribute. So what did I call it? Let me just go back to my thing. So impact rotate and impact scale. Yes. All right. So this is going to be a vector attribute. Both rotate and scale need to be vector attributes. So impact underscore rotate. It's a vector. This is a per particle attribute, meaning that every single particle can have its own value for this impact rotate attribute. And I'll add that. And now let's do the same for scale. Impact scale. Same thing. It's a vector per particle. Add initial state attribute. Say OK. And now they show up here. And that's great. Okay, so let's put that in an expression. So I'm just going to right mouse button click in here, Runtime Expression, and now let me just go grab my expression and copy that, pop that in there, click Create. Cool. Alright, so now I've got these expressions that are driving these attributes, but if we play, I don't think we're really going to see much of a difference. No. And actually, you know what we can do to really see? Let's go back to my gun, and let's set a crater high value that's crazy, like 10. And a crater low value, super low, like 1. So now, theoretically, the scale should be, the scale of my bullet hole should be some random number between 1 and 10. So let's try that out. But that's not happening. The reason that's not happening is because I haven't told the instancer node that that's what I want to have happen yet. So let's select particle and go down to the instancer section. So here we are in the instancer section. Alright, so here's my scale. Now if I select scale, right now it's set to none, so what's happening is the instancer node is not modifying the scale of my instance geometry at all. But if I click on this, you see there's all sorts of attributes that I can use to modify, or that I can use to drive this attribute. What I'm going to use is I'm going to use the attribute that I added myself, impact rotate. Oh, we see something's happening. And I'm going to do the same thing for, oh, hang on, hey, no, silly me. This is scale. I shouldn't use impact rotate. Let me change that. No wonder it looks all weird. Impact scale. There we go. All right, much better. Impact scale, and let's go to rotation, and I'm going to select impact rotate, Alright, cool. Now if I deselect this and then I come back to it, I just want to make sure that, okay, cool. These two choices have stuck. So cool. So now if I play, now we can see, yeah, we can see that some of these bullet holes are huge and some of them are tiny because I set that crazy 10 and 1, which is, you know, good to see what's happening, but probably a little extreme for what we want to do here. Alright, so maybe I'll change this to 4 and 2. There we go. So I want there to be some randomness here, but I don't want it to jump out at me. I don't want the viewer to think, oh my goodness, some of those bullet holes are gigantic. I just want there to be some difference here. So alright, so this is looking pretty good. If we stop here, actually let's stop for a second and take a look at what our render is looking like. I'm just going to hide the wall for a second and render. So here's all my bullet holes, and if we look at the alpha, see we've got this nice holdout alpha. Again, there's our color with the the complete profile, but our alpha, which shows us only the section that we want. So this is coming along pretty good. Turn my wall back on. Okay, cool. Alright, so I've got my my particle, my impact particles showing up with instance geometry. That's cool. And I could totally stop here. This would be pretty effective. But I actually want to do a little bit more fun stuff. What I would like now is, since these are such big gouges coming out of the wall, I think we need to see something coming off of the wall. We could either have like little rocks, little pebbles coming out of here, or sparks. In this case, I'm just going to go with sparks, but if you prefer to have rubble and little rocks, you would use exactly the same system that I'm going to set up, but you just apply another particle instancer node to it. But in this case, I'm just going to go with sparks. So what I want to do is I want to have my end particle crater. Actually, let's switch to a different view here. I want to have my crater particle actually emit the particles. So when my particles get born, they'll emit particles, which will be cool. Alright, so in dynamics, end particles, create particles, emit from object. In this case, I want it to be a directional emitter. Whenever I'm creating emitters, I always leave it pretty much at the default values, and then I change them after the fact. So I'm going to click create. Alright. So I'm going to call this emitter spark, and my new particle object, I'm going to call that end particle, or sparks. Sparks is what I have in my notes. Emitter sparks. Cool. Now if we look at the emitter itself, it is a directional emitter. And the direction that I want these particles going in is Z. It's not the default X, so I'm just going to change that. Now, this is a pretty straightforward situation where I've got a flat wall here. If I needed them to be, say this was on a cylinder or something, I could just write some expressions to find out, the normals at the point of impact and set the direction accordingly. But in this case, it's nice and straightforward. So I want my particles emitted along Z. I'm going to set my spread to say 0.5. And the speed, well, let's start with just say 10. And let's try it out. Alright, so now when my crater particles are born, they start emitting particles, which is cool. This isn't exactly the effect that I want, but it's kind of neat. Now you can see that they're all pouring out here. What's happening is I can tell they're colliding with this wall, which I don't want. So I'm just going to select these guys. This is my particle, my sparks particle. And go to collisions, turn off collide, see if that helps. There we go. So now my particles are coming off the direction I want. Now it all depends what you want, right? if this was, say, the side of a swimming pool, and I just wanted stuff gushing out, this could be pretty cool. But that's not quite what I want. I want sparks. I want a sort of a finite effect. I don't want this to keep on going. Now, another thing. Notice that all my particles are coming from a very discrete point. What? Crazy mouse. All my particles are coming from, they're coming from the actual point of the particle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make one little change here. I'm going to adjust my min-max distance, say 0.5 and 0.3. So that at least get my particles away from the surface. There we go. That looks a little bit more natural. Okay, cool. But they're still gushing out all the time, which obviously I don't want. What I want is I want the this emitter sparks. I want it to emit a big burst of particles, but then I want it to stop after a frame or two. Now, one thing that's really great is, well, I think it's great that you can emit particles from other particles, but what's cool is when you're emitting particles from other particles, you can have a per particle emission from the first particle object. So what you need to do is select the particle that's actually doing the emission, so my n particle crater, then go up to n particles and select per point emission rates. Actually, before I do that, I want to take a look at something. If I select emitter sparks and we go down to the emission section, if we go down, sorry, into the rate section, where is it? I can't find rate. Speed, spread, diction. Ah, here it is. No, I can never find rate. Okay, so here we have use per point rates, but you notice how it's grayed out? I can't select it. That's because I haven't added the per point functionality yet. So I have to select the particle object, go to n particles, per point emission rates, click on that. So now when I go back to the emitter, we see that that's not just, it's not grayed out anymore, and now it's turned on, which is awesome. Cool. Now, nothing really has changed. Well, except my emission rates are down to 0. Because now I have to set up the, I have to tell my, okay, so what is the rate? So if I go back to the particle object, and or my original, my crater particle, which is doing the actual emission, and I go down to the per particle section, so here it is, emitter sparks rate, pp, that's been added. So I'm going to right mouse button click on here and select Runtime Expression. Alright, so this is my expression from before. Just going to add to this. Alright, so what I want to do here is I want to say, okay, so my emitter sparks rate pp equals, actually this is kind of cool, this float is, my impact scale, this is determined by the size of my, or the scale of my bullet hole. So I'm going to have some bullet holes that are big and some that are small, and that is determined by this value. Well, this variable, I can keep using it. So I can adjust my emission based on the size of the bullet hole, which I think is really cool. So yeah, so my my per point emission rate is going to be whatever the randomly generated scale is for my bullet hole times 20. Right now 20 is a pretty arbitrary number, but it's a starting point. So that's what the emission rate is going to be. However, how big the crater is times 20. Then I say, but if the age of my crater particle is greater than 0.1, set the rate to 0. So that means it's going to emit particles like crazy as soon as the particle is born, but then pretty much the next frame it's going to set that to 0. So let's just grab that and pop it into our expression. Edit. No errors, that's a good sign. And now let's play. And there we go. So now we see particles being born. Actually, let's switch back to our shot camera. So now we see our particles being ejected as soon as the bullet hole shows up, but really only for that one frame, which is pretty cool. Okay, now the particle itself. There's a bunch of things we could do with this. I'm gonna just do something really simple here. Shading, shading, shading. Okay, blobby surface, that doesn't really fit. I'm gonna select tube particles, and let's see. Set some values here. Obviously in something like this, you're just going to adjust whatever looks good. So let's see. Radius 0. Now, these are going to be pretty small, so I'm going to set radius 0 to 0.5 and radius 1 to 0.1. I want these to be, they're sparks. They're going to be pretty skinny. I'm going to set my tail size to 2. So there we go. That doesn't look too bad. Now, they're being emitted kind of slowly. I mean, they're sparks, right? They should come flying off. Oops, they should come flying off, so I think I need to adjust my emission speed here. So there's my emitter. So I've already adjusted the min-max off of this guy, right? So there's my min-max on the spread, but my speed's a little slow. So I'm going to turn my speed up to, say, 70, and I'm going to add a little randomness to this. It's always nice to have a little randomness. And let's have a look at these guys now. Okay, so that's better. Still not quite there, but much better. Okay, now, with my particle sparks, if we come up, and if we look at dynamic properties, we can see again they are being affected by the gravity, but I don't want to really work with the default gravity field here. I want to be a little bit more specific, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on ignore solver gravity. So now these guys are not affected by gravity at all. They just fly off, which is cool. Well, actually, it's not cool. I'm going to apply a gravity field just to these guys. So I'm going to select N particle sparks, fields, gravity field, and I'm going to crank up its magnitude. Let's try 50 and see how that looks. That's not bad. Let's put it up a little bit more, 75. And sparks, sparks, sparks. There we are, so we can really see them. It's not bad. Let's see. Actually, hang on a second. Alright, so let's see. Yeah, that's not too bad. Now, obviously, I can fine-tune this some more. I could fine-tune this forever, but this is pretty close. Actually, you know what? One last thing I want to do here, because I like the behavior here, but let's say I'm not happy with the number of sparks that are coming out of here. If I want to change it, I got to go into my expression editor, and I got to dig around, and I got to find it, crater shape, and there it is. And that's just, that's a pain in the neck. I don't want to work that way. So what I think I want to do is I want to add the same control to my spark emission rate that I have with my crater size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an attribute here. So I'm going to say modify, add attribute, and what am I going to call it? Let's see. What are we talking about? Sparks. So let's call this spark mult. Sure, why not? And it's just a float value. And it's certainly not per particle. This is just an attribute that I'm adding to my my control. And alright, so let's see the default. Right now the number that I put in there was 20, so I'm going to set that as my default value, but I'll be able to change it. So let's say OK. So let me just say that. Alright, so spark mult is 20. Script editor. So if I come into the script editor here, there it is, m4.spark_mult. Hang on a second. So there it is, m4.spark_mult. That's something I like to do. I'm sure a lot of you guys like to do that as well. If you just put a value in something in the channel box, the script editor will give you the exact spelling of it, which is convenient. Alright, so let's go back to our expression. So right now we've got, actually, let's make this a little bigger as well. Alright. So we've got these guys. We've got float crater high, float crater low, and let's say float, oops, spark mult equals get adder paste m4.spark_mult tilde. There we go. Alright. Edit that. Okay, great. So now, just like we have happening here, we capture whatever values I've put, or the user has put into the crater high, crater low. So now I can put a value in spark mult. Maya will grab that, spark mult. So we grab that, or grabs the value, puts it in this variable. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down, and this arbitrary 20, not that there's anything wrong with the number 20, but I'm going to replace that. So now the rate is going to be determined by, or the rate for my sparks is going to be determined by the size of my crater times whatever spark mult value I have in my control. So let's edit that, close this. Alright, so spark mult, so let's say I set it really low, and now when we play, whoops, now when we play, yeah, not too many sparks. Let's rewind, let's crank it up, let's set it to 100. Now there's tons. Nice thing about this is you could animate this, you could have it high at some point, low, whatever, or you can just set it, based on, what you think looks nice. And again, the nice thing about setting your system up like this is it's really easy to work with. You just build the system, then you don't have to worry about messing around with it. Once it's in place, you can work with it, you can just, focus on what looks nice, or you can hand it off to other people and they can just get to work and worry about what looks nice. They don't have to worry about the technology. So yeah, so that's it. So that's the basic setup for the instanced dynamic system. And yeah, I think it works pretty good. I'd like to thank Oliver Balzer for letting me borrow his machine gun. I think it looks pretty cool. So yeah, so in the next section we will look at rendering this and compositing it.